oftentimes differences in like house chores. A lot of ADHDers, not all, will like forget or, have a hard time with certain house chores, and that can lead a non-ADHD partner to feel like they don't care, they're not contributing.
Do you have any tips in that area?
I'm like looking at my really messy kitchen right now, right in front of me as we're talking. I'm like,
Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Alayna Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. Today, we are joined by Jak Levine-Pritzker, a certified health and life coach and the founder of Authentically ADHD. Jak was diagnosed with ADHD during her time in law school and has since dedicated her career to empowering neurodiverse individuals. Through one-on-one coaching, group sessions, and a vibrant online community, she provides invaluable support and advocacy for those with ADHD. This topic was highly requested. Jak was an absolute joy to talk with. We talk all things ADHD and dating. We talk about limerance versus love. We talk about masking and neuronormativity. We talk about what it's like to be in relationship with a non-ADHD partner. We talk about sensory sensitivities and sex. It was a really great conversation, and I hope you all enjoy it. One note, the animals, like my cat and dog, Bugs and Julio, were on a different level this episode. So we did our best to edit around it, but for the Patreon exclusive extended cut, we left a lot more of the animal interruptions in so you can get a real peek behind the curtain. Also in the Patreon extended cut, we talk about medication, we talk about friendship, and we talk about the experience of feeling trapped or stuck in relationship once the newness has worn off for ADHD folks. Overall, it was a great conversation, and I hope that you all enjoy it. Can we start by just hearing a bit about you?
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Jak. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an ADHD coach. What that means is I work with clients one-on-one, in group, in community, and I also do a lot of advocacy around ADHD and neurodiversity in general. I really try to think about how to move away from the idea of ADHD as purely pathological and deficit-based and move it more into a neutral or neurodiversity sort of framework where we think about different strengths and different challenges that are associated with ADHD. I sort of came into this while I was in law school, which feels like a whole other world ago. I was really struggling in law school a lot. I was performing really well. I was achieving really highly. On the outside, you would have no idea, but I was dealing with so much anxiety and things just got really bad. I went to see the school psychologist, which was my first time sort of dabbling in any mental health anything, and she was like, yo, I think you got ADHD, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't right. Fit me at all. Like, that's definitely not true. And she's like, maybe you should just like go check it out. And I kind of deep dived and like I got into the world of sort of different presentations, more internal presentations of ADHD. And I was like, oh shit, I guess she might be right. And then, yeah, from there, I was already sort of doing like life coaching and health coaching with all my spare time in law school. And then I just kind of started posting more about ADHD and just kind of naturally pivoted into that world.
You mentioned different presentations of ADHD and how you're in law school, you're high performing, high achieving, not somebody who on the outside you would look at and think that person has ADHD. Can you tell us a little bit about those different presentations? You mentioned a more internal presentation of ADHD. What does that look like?
So I think that, when we picture sort of the stereotypical idea of ADHD, what a lot of people without knowing more about it think of, you often think of kind of like a kid bouncing around in a chair, maybe disrupting the classroom or like throwing paper airplanes or, just kind of
Class
being.
clown.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that you can see and experience. Whereas a lot of ADHDers tend to have more of that internalized. So rather than maybe external hyperactivity, it might look like hyperactivity inside your mind, so that your thoughts are just going and going and going and bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. Or it might look like, I'm really quietly fidgeting with this random piece of plastic that I just found on the desk under the table. Like, you would never know that, right? I'm not like bouncing around or things like that. And then in addition to that, I think a lot of that internal presentation, I think some of that is maybe just natural, like just different presentations, different ways of experiencing things. But I think a lot of it is masking and compensation patterns where especially folks who are socialized as girls learn to sit still and to make eye contact and to be quiet and to listen and to not interrupt, right? So a lot of those like socializing things makes there be more masking and covering up of maybe natural presentations or expressions of traits.
Right. Like it's less appropriate or less accepted for somebody that the world has deemed to be a girl to have to display those hyperactive traits. And so there's maybe more of a push to internalize it, a push to mask it.
I think so. So there's actually currently 3 different types of ADHD. I don't really love I don't really love the DSM in general, and I don't really love how they break down ADHD, but just to give like a little primer. So there's currently like ADHD hyperactive / impulsive type. So that's one type. And then there's ADHD inattentive type, which is what we used to think of as ADD pretty much. Close enough. And then there's ADHD combined type. So that's also some of the differences we see in presentation beyond masking. While I definitely have some traits, I am combined type, I lean way more inattentive, like with major quotes, because I don't actually really think that's the right way to think about it.
So you outlined the way that the DSM outlines kind of what ADHD is. And then your experience with ADHD as well, which kind of goes against some of the stereotypes that you think of when you think of ADHD. What are some other misconceptions or things that people get wrong about folks with ADHD or the experience of ADHD?
A really big one is just around, like, especially since ADHD is viewed through such a school lens, around one's ability to get good grades or perform or achieve in school or even in work settings as we get older. And certainly many ADHDers do have a hard time in school. It certainly doesn't mean that if you do get good grades or are high achieving in school or work, that certainly does not mean that you cannot have or be ADHD. It probably means you've either found compensation strategies and tools that really work for you, or you're working double hard, or it could also mean that you've found an environment that really suits you. And whether that's in school or work, something that plays more to your strengths. Like, I did a lot of like independent studies in college because I was like, this is fun. So that's a big one that stands out.
How can ADHD impact the way that folks approach dating or impact somebody's experience when dating?
So ADHDers are really like novelty based. Like, we're really activated with novelty. There's many things like interest, urgency, novelty, but like sort of this like dating energy can be really intense. I see often. So there's like this newness, and I find a lot of ADHDers can get kind of like really locked in to that, and it can kind of take over and make it really hard to focus on anything else. There's something, I'm sure you're familiar with, Limerance is something that I frequently see with ADHD folks, just kind of like new person, like hyper fixation on it.
Is that how you would describe limerence for someone who maybe isn't familiar?
Yeah, I think I would describe it kind of really kind of obsessing or like hyper focusing on a person. And I think sometimes that can be like not feeling great, and sometimes it can feel good. I think in the realm of like ADHD dating, I see it more as just like it's all they're thinking about and like planning around and focusing on, and like to the point where like it's hard to get work done. It's hard to like focus on anything. And then I also see just like sort of in the earlier phases, like especially if they're on dating apps or things like that, just a sort of a difficulty managing multiple kind of conversations at once, getting really overwhelmed and maybe like shutting down, being really into it and then like backing off. Sometimes we see like showing up late or early, sort of the timepieces I can see as big. I think something called RSD, which stands for Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, is a huge thing that shows up in dating.
I always ask my audience before these episodes, I'm talking to so-and-so, or I'm covering this topic. What's something you'd like to ask? Do you have any questions? And you are just naming, tick by tick, point by point, the themes of the questions. So I would love to dive into each of these a bit further. So we could start with limerence. A big question that I got was, as somebody with ADHD, how do I know the difference between limerence versus a genuine connection, or limerence versus love? If I know that I'm in limerence, what do I do?
With ADHD, we have such a tendency to lack self-trust. I think a lot of that comes from trying to like perform in rules and norms that sort of weren't for us. It gets things all messy. So I think generally building trust practices with yourself, so really learning to sort of check in and sit with yourself and journal, or for a lot of people that might be more verbal processing, needing to just kind of talk it out. You can sort of start building up different data points with yourself. So starting to notice things, like I have to do this with my OCD a lot. Like, is this more of like an intrusive thought, or is this more of like a real thought? How do I know the difference? And for me, it's noticing a lot of body sensations, honestly. So like noticing what your body feels like when, you know, it is more of that limerent state. It might feel really like urgent, or your body might feel really like tense or kind of like activated. Whereas maybe in other situations, you might just have more of like a calm, excited energy about it. I'm not suggesting that's what people's bodies will feel like, but starting to notice those things within yourself.
Yeah, like there's something about the intensity of it. Whether it's a physical sensation, kind of a mental experience, an emotional experience or expression. What you're saying makes sense in terms of, does it feel good or does it feel intrusive, right? Does it feel overwhelming, like you said? Does it feel like you can't separate and focus on all the other areas of life that you also need to focus on?
Being clear on not making it wrong or bad that you feel that way. I think there's a lot of, I think that's something that gets really pathologized too. Like, oh, it's so terrible to like have your focus on someone else like that. And I think like you just said something really important, which is like, is it causing you distress? Right? Like if it's causing you distress, like you probably want to sort it out and figure it out and get some support and whatever. If it's not and it's feeling good, like whatever, roll with it, you know? But I think separating those things out and then allowing yourself to feel how you feel and just trying to create space between the action that follows that.
Oh, I like that. Create space between your internal experience and your action.
Right.
Or your reaction.
Yeah.
But before we get to the rest of the content, I want to take a second to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, Love and Pies. If you've been around on my channel for a while, you have heard me talk about Love and Pies. This is the only mobile game that I consistently return to. Love and Pies is this heartwarming, cozy, casual game with beautiful graphics. You're the owner of this little cafe and you are serving customers to upgrade your cafe. And there's little love storylines and side quests and queer characters, but there's also the big mystery going on, which is arson. Everybody's like blaming your mom for burning down her cafe, and your mom has disappeared. just like a casual missing person. And so in the midst of this very cute and cozy gameplay where you match different ingredients to like create other items that you can also like match and level up and then serve to customers, in the midst of all of that, you're trying to solve this mystery of who burnt down the cafe and where's your mom. It's like the perfect combination of fun and engaging with relaxing. Like, it's not stressful while also taking just enough thinking to make it engaging. Like, not only are you matching ingredients to make different food items, if you like build an oven out of the matched things, then the oven can give you different ingredients to build new recipes and serve new customers. And they often have like special events, like the one that just passed was their February Love event. So there was like a side quest to get roses and like you match the roses together, and it was very cute. And now their St. Patrick's Day event has just started and you can unlock like specialized themed items for your cafe. It's hard to find that perfect level of interesting enough to be engaging, but not so engaging that it's stressful. It's just nice, and I would recommend it. And if you download the game now and you reach day 3 within the game within a week, you can claim a sweet bonus treat of 200 energy and 50 gems, which are used to get more ingredients to make more baked goods and drinks and cat toys and all sorts of stuff for your cafe. It's linked in the description. I recommend you check it out. That kind of ties into the next piece that you mentioned, the intensity just generally. Again, this is a question that I saw in a variety of different ways, is like, I bring a lot of intensity to a new relationship. People tell me I'm too much. That kind of narrative. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you could say to people who are feeling that way?
That's something I forgot to mention, is like in dating, sort of having a hard time sometimes with small talk, having a really hard time with like either undersharing or oversharing. Like ADHDers tend to like jump into like heavy, deep stuff pretty quickly. It's like a lot more how we naturally connect, I would say. It's something, again, to ask yourself, like to not have these universal rules about, like if we think of maybe zooming out, you know, there's these neuronormative rules in place about dating and about how to be. And so neuronormativity, which is just for people who may not know what I'm talking about, is sort of a set of ideas and beliefs around how someone should think, feel, function, right? So similar to heteronormativity, we can kind of apply it to like minds and brains. And so neuronormativity would say like the norm is that you kind of start small and you ask each other some small talk questions and you like build up in this very linear progression. Just because that's sort of the social norm does not mean it's right or better. It just means it's been constructed to be that way. And so I think really challenging it and asking yourself, like, is that something that I want to change about myself? Like, is that something I want to adapt? Do I want to sort of adjust my behaviors a little bit, maybe mask my behaviors a little bit because I know it'll be better received potentially? Or do I just want to be me and go about this how I go about this, and the right people will like that and the wrong people won't, and that's cool. And I tend towards more of the latter when possible. But yeah, I think just questioning neuronormative ideas of like intensity.
It's such a new, but then as you're saying it, it also feels obvious, like way to think about these things. The idea of neuronormativity. Earlier, you referred to ADHD as like just another neurotype, just like there are all sorts of neurotypes and ADHD is just one of them.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, of course. Like it feels like a duh as you're saying it, but in this way that also feels like I'm having a minor revolution in my own mind.
Cool.
Listening to you talk about this, where it's like, if you don't question the norms in place, if you don't question the way that things just have been and the way you've been socialized to think about things, you see something like what we're just talking about, maybe intensity or, jumping into the deep end in conversation, not following those social norms. The question is, well, how do I fix it? How do I do it differently? And nobody questions that question. But what you're saying is, maybe let's try a different question. Maybe let's start with the question, how do I feel about my intensity? How do I feel about the way I communicate, the way that I show up? Does it actually feel good for me? Does it feel like who I am and a way that I feel good in the world if others weren't responding to me in a negative way?
Right.
Yes? Then maybe it's not something we have to fix.
Yeah. It's just so sort of this pathology paradigm where it's like there's one right way to be and think, and there's one right sort of formulation of brain functioning and behavior. And if you fall outside of that, you are broken and need to be fixed, right? That's like embedded in the DSM and therefore embedded in our understanding of ADHD and ourselves. So much that we sometimes don't even realize that it's there, which is why it's so important that we start sort of viewing ADHD through different lenses, which is not at all to take away from the challenges or the disabling aspects of it, right? Like what we're talking about, we can unlearn and re-relate to that all we want, and we're still going to be hitting up against a society that is going to sort of push back on it. And that is especially hard in workplaces when our careers and our livelihood and our survival is dependent on it. So it's not to say it's a super quick, easy thing, but I think for you, part of the reason it's like clicking so strongly and quickly is because I imagine giving your work, you've done a lot of unlearning around heteronormativity, right? So to kind of like copy paste that, it's like, oh yeah, it's not so different. I mean, homosexuality was a disorder in the DSM until the 1970s. So like we really got to question what we pathologize.
No, absolutely. And you kind of touched on the place that my head was going next, which is it's one thing to unlearn all of this for ourselves and kind of find a place of comfort moving through the world in a way that feels authentic. It doesn't change the fact that we operate within systems that punish often, things that are outside of the norm. Is there a way to balance that with coping strategies or like managing the expectations of the external world?
Yeah, they definitely kind of hit up against each other for sure. And I think just to also name quickly that I do think like intersecting identities also play a big role here, and like how much privilege one holds in different identities, I think really impacts how the world outside responds to us, right? So I think that's an important layer. But I think that the first step is to really work through that internal stuff. So when we hit up against it in the real world, we can sort of come at it from maybe a place of curiosity rather than a place of like, I'm wrong and bad because I did this, which just leads to a shutdown. So when you can kind of be like, okay, like, here's my natural way of being. I lean towards intensity. That's not wrong or bad. I'm noticing that that's not working in every setting for every other person. Like other people have different levels of intensity the same way I do, right? And none of them are right or wrong. I think from there, it's like you can sort of make choices. Do I want to adapt to that? I think a lot of ADHD and neurodivergent people in general really benefit from connecting with other neurodivergent ADHD people as well to kind of be like, oh, like here's what it's like when this is just the natural sort of thing, and try it on and see how it works. Some people are like, this is perfect, I love it. And some people are like, this is way too much for me too. And so just continuing to make choices from a place of curiosity and compassion and not this like internalized place of shame, and understand that either choice is probably going to have different consequences, and that's something we need to think about.
What you said about community is so important. And so I do just want to note for the listener that Jack's stuff will all be in the description. It'll be in the show notes. Authentically ADHD. You have an Instagram. Do you have any other places people can find you while we're talking about it?
So I hang out a lot on my Instagram, but I do run actually a virtual membership. So that's called the Authentically ADHD Community. And that's a really cool space. It's all ADHDers, and we do like Q&As and socials and body doubles, and it's so validating to sort of have those external experiences and come back and be like, yo, this is what happened. Like, you get so much validation and ideas, and even if it's hard in the external world, it's like having sort of this like safe haven where you can go and be like, oh, okay, I'm not broken. Like, the outside world's just different.
You also mentioned rejection sensitivity, which is another piece that came up a lot, that people were wondering, how do I deal with rejection sensitivity both while dating and in relationship?
So, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, otherwise known as RSD, is how you'll often see it talked about, is essentially, so it's not something that's exclusive to ADHD, but it's something that really often kind of comes along for the ride. And essentially, it's like a heightened, again, like heightened according to what or who, but just to keep it simple, it's like a heightened sensitivity to real or perceived rejection or criticism. My perspective on it, and this is just my opinion, is that RSD is more of a trauma response from sort of existing in a world where you're getting constant messages that you're wrong or bad or broken or doing things wrong, or you're too sensitive, or you're too this, or you're too loud, or you're too much, or, you know, why can't you just sit still, or why are you staring out the window? I think it's totally reasonable that we kind of develop a heightened, like, kind of like hyper-vigilant, on-guard response. That's what RSD is, in my opinion, at least. And it's a really tough one to navigate and to support. I think, first of all, just like knowing about it and learning about it and identifying if that's something that you relate to. I think it's, again, important to challenge, you know, those ideas of like being too sensitive is something that ADHDers hear all the time. And like, again, like too sensitive compared to who, or compared to what, or according to who, or according to what. Maybe questioning whether sensitivity is really like such a bad thing, while also acknowledging that RSD is like really, really deeply painful. It causes anxiety, depression, suicidality. Like, it's a serious thing. So I don't want to make light of it, but I think it's important to like view it in context. A few things can be really helpful, and I think it really depends on the person and the circumstance, and so these are not going to be helpful across the board. If one can do this in a way that's not like self-gaslighty, sort of doing some like fact grounding, once I've built trust with someone, and once you know, like, you're not making this up, you're not too sensitive, like, you're allowed to feel how you feel, really trying to separate out those like feelings from like the logic component of it, like allowing the feelings to be separate while also sort of being able to dive in and go like, okay, like, what happened, and like, what are you making that mean? So I find that exercise can be really helpful, again, if someone can do it without like being gaslighty to themselves about it, but just sort of being able to separate those out. And it's not saying what you're making it mean is wrong or inaccurate, or that you're like totally making that up. But I find that as a first step to be really, really helpful, because you can usually notice like pretty big sort of, you know, in like CBT worlds, like cognitive distortions happening. Like, you can usually see like, oh, there's a really big jump happening here. Yeah. So that can be quite helpful as a starting place. And then, yeah, kind of getting into like, what's actually going on here for me? Like, what did this trigger for me? What did this bring up for me? And tending to that separately. And hopefully, you know, having people, whether that's a therapist or a coach or a friend or a peer or a family or whatever, where you can talk it out with and kind of go like, yeah, here's what's going on. Sort of having that space to process through it is really big.
You just gave such a beautiful outline of like what somebody can actually do. It's so tough to find resources that actually say, here's what you can do, right? Not just, this is what it is, and it's valid, and like, just be nice to yourself, you're fine.
Totally.
You know, but
yeah.
What you've just outlined, so to make sure that I'm understanding, you've kind of said, okay, let's parse out, first of all, separating logic versus feeling. So important, because You're not going to logic yourself out of a feeling.
Mm-mm.
Nobody's going to do that.
Mm-mm.
You might logic yourself out of a narrative, sure, but the feeling is valid. The feeling is present, allowing, I'm reiterating this because I really want the listener to hear this. The feeling is present. It is there. And it's okay, right? Like the feeling can be separate from the logic, the thoughts, the narrative, the kind of intellectualizing piece. Those two things can exist simultaneously and seemingly at odds. So in this specific context, right, you have the feeling, whatever the feeling is, and then allowing that to be there, giving that space. And also, like you said, not attaching a morality to it, not attaching this is good or bad or right or wrong. It just is.
Yep.
And then flipping into the kind of logic piece and asking, what happened? What are the facts? And kind of what's the narrative that I've placed on it? And then next step, take a little bit deeper. Maybe where's this coming from? What's the root? What's been triggered? And then getting support, going to your community, going to your therapist, going to your friends, and having that support around you. Like, could you have answered that question better? I don't think.
Oh, I'm so glad. It felt actually really scattered, so I'm glad that it came across.
No, it's like, okay, that could be useful for a lot of emotional reactions, right? Not just specifically RSD, but absolutely in the RSD context. What are some things that come up or that you've seen in your work with somebody who has ADHD in a relationship, whether that's with somebody who doesn't have ADHD or not?
I asked my partner this morning before she left, actually. I was curious, like, from her perspective, how she sees my ADHD show up in the relationship. And the things that she mentioned, I'll add on to them, but I think these are big ones. The main thing she mentioned, which I think is massive, that I actually didn't think of otherwise, she said that my mind is always going, which is absolutely true. I think ADHD minds are really, really fast and busy, and it's really hard to be in the present moment. And so, she said that oftentimes when we're together, she can tell I'm not really here and that I'm like in my brain, in my mind somewhere. And that is definitely a thing that shows up. And it's definitely something that I think like the ADHD person, wants to, I at least want to try to work on when I can. I want to be present for the people that I love and care about, while also finding like communicating to compromise and figure out how to make that happen, right? I often need really clear like parameters around things to know like, okay, like I'm going to be present for this time and I'm going to bring out my fidgets and I'm going to like turn my phone off and things like that. So that's a really, really big one that I see. I think when folks are living together, definitely like oftentimes differences in like house chores, a lot of ADHDers, not all, will like forget or, have a hard time with certain house chores, and that can lead the non-ADHD partner to feel like they don't care, they're not contributing. So having conversations about that, figuring out how to sort of make that work and move through that.
Do you have any tips in that area?
I'm like looking at my really messy kitchen right now, right in front of me as we're talking. I'm like, if someone has them, let me know.
Let us know in the comments if you figured this one out.
I'm in a relationship where like it just kind of works for the most part. So I'm really thankful that our like levels of messiness just kind of like match. But I would say generally just communicating. Like, hey, I'm having a really hard time with this. I really care, like making sure the ADHD partner is expressing like this isn't a lack of care, and that the non-ADHD partner believes that, and trying to get creative. Like, what do we need? Do we need like a fun little chore chart with stickers, or do we need, to each take on certain chores? Do we need reminders? Do we need, certain like clear rules in place that can help your brain? And how can the non-ADHD partner also be, caring and understanding and patient? I think the kind of like solutions are super dependent.
I'm thinking back to what you were saying about one way not being inherently better or worse or
Yeah.
wrong or right versus
Right.
another. And applying that to anything, even something like tidiness or cleanliness, I wonder what the impact would be if both partners got on board with like throwing out the idea that tidiness is inherently morally good.
Totally.
And even whether you choose to want to have a tidy home or not, I'm imagining that could lift some of the spikiness, some of the prickliness of a conversation around who's doing what chores or wanting things more tidy or less tidy. If we come at it from a place of it's just simply a preference. It has nothing, it has nothing to do with whether or not you are a good or bad or worthy or unworthy person.
Absolutely.
Animals, if you guys are listening to this or watching this and you're not a part of the Patreon, we've edited around it, but the animals have been absolutely out of control on this episode.
They're on one.
And it will only be included in the Patreon extended, except for this tail. Like, how am I going to edit around that? It's
so
not going to happen. So
I think it should just stay.
Oh my
We love
goodness.
a good cat tail.
That's where my mind went, is like removing that kind of moral hierarchy around, well, the laundry needs to be folded right after it's finished in order for you to be a good person.
Yeah, that's so big. I love that you're bringing it back to that. Yeah, taking the morality out of it. And it's not like, oh, the right way to be an adult is to have all your chores done, right? That's like a huge point of shame for a lot of ADHDers, which is also like connected to RSD, where it's like if a partner is like, hey, like you didn't do the dishes, like that's gonna like hit so hard and be so painful. It's gonna bring up all these narratives around being a bad adult and like not being able to function and so on and so forth. So yeah, really making sure both parties, like you said, are on the same page, that like there's actually no rules that are better or worse, and let's try to work on this together. And one other thing that I remembered was helpful for me actually was asking my partner, like, I can certainly not keep a clean house at all times, but like, are there certain aspects that are really important to you? Like, are there a few things that are like really important to you? Like the shower is super important to her. So I really try to like pick up my stuff in the shower more than I would otherwise. So yeah, seeing if there's like a few things where you can really make sure the energy goes into. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I'm curious if you have thoughts on limerence and like how to navigate that.
I like what you said.
Okay.
Or like what we kind of came to in the discussion around checking in with your body and figuring out the intensity level that's there and whether or not it feels, the word that's coming to mind is productive, but I don't mean it in that way. I mean like helpful. Does it feel exciting versus anxiety, just purely anxiety provoking, like checking in with yourself around that. And then can you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, you're answering it perfectly. Yeah, I'm just curious about if folks are like, hey, what do I do? Not how do I recognize it, but maybe like once I have recognized what do I do? Yeah.
I would apply the exact same framework that you outlined for the rejection sensitivity.
Yeah. Cool.
Right? Like once we've identified it, the feeling is valid.
Yeah.
Like soak up that feeling of energy and you know, is there a way that we can move that energy to a place that feels helpful in whatever way, right? Allowing that to be there. What's the narrative? You know, what stories are we attaching to the feeling of limerence? Whether it's, this is my perfect person and we're going to be in love forever and they're going to solve all my problems, or a narrative of, I'm being too much again. I'm in too deep again. The spiral of, I'm somehow doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Identifying that, asking what's been triggered, what's the root. A root could be depending on other people for your validation. I don't know, whatever it is, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and then reaching out to peers and friends and loved ones for support. That would be my initial thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, it does translate pretty well.
It really translates. Like, I really like what you said.
Yeah. And then I guess the only other thing I can think of, and I don't know if this is helpful in a limerence context, but I know for me, as someone with OCD and also like ADHDers just tend to have like, even without ADHD, really sticky sort of minds that will sort of like ruminate a lot and think a lot. A huge tool that I use with OCD is kind of practicing being with uncertainty and being with like, maybe not, maybe it's the perfect person for me, maybe not, like we'll see, rather than if there is a sort of urgent sort of like drive to like figure it out or like get, you know, some resolution, practicing just being like, yeah, maybe not, like we'll see.
Yeah, I like
Which
that.
is easier said than done.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's almost a mini step in the what's the narrative piece.
Yeah.
Right? So you kind of find the narrative and then trying the tool of adding the thought. Maybe.
Yeah.
Kind of on the flip side of limerence, I had a few people write in about being in relationship or kind of once the newness of a relationship wears off, how to stop feeling trapped, how to maintain the relationship, how to enjoy sex or intimacy when things aren't new and shiny anymore, quote unquote.
That's definitely another pattern that is pretty strong. Like I said, ADHDers love novelty. It's not so different than like, I mean, obviously it's way different, but in a similar realm of like getting a new planner, we get all these new like pens and we're like so excited and we use the planner and we're like, this is amazing. We're so psyched about it. It's like our whole life. And then like we're bored of it and then we never touch the planner again. I see a similar pattern applied to people. And I think it can be helpful to just know like, yeah, the novelty has sort of worn off a little bit and sort of thinking about how to find new ways to bring in novelty and how to sort of lean into other areas as well, like lean into the comfort more and find the things about the relationship that feel really special that you can't have in like new relationship energy. Like I think a lot of times there's also a lot of stories around like what relationships should and should not be like. And so I think knowing like, yeah, this is normal, this is okay, this doesn't mean something's wrong or bad, and like I can grieve that I don't have that sort of new energy, sorry, my cat is meowing now.
No, it's okay. It's your turn. It's your turn.
He has started.
Some of that chaos.
He has started. Sort of grieving that new relationship energy is gone and finding what else is left. And, you know, I'm in a monogamous relationship, so that's the framing that I'm talking about. But a lot of folks also benefit from exploring different like open relationships and polyamory and like other relationship styles where you can be bringing in different aspects and different sort of new feelings as well.
Well, and that is a direction that my mind went.
Yeah.
When I read this question now through post our conversation, again, kind of we're asking this question, is it inherently bad or is it inherently worse to have that energy wear off and then like want to experience it again? Is wanting that experience wrong? No, of course not.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that you are fulfilling your own needs and like figuring out what you want in your life while also respecting the people around you and like, you know, open communication and doing your best not to hurt anybody else. But there are so many different styles of relationship.
I love it. It's another just form of questioning like the norms and figuring out what actually works. And you said something else that really stood out to me too, which just kind of building upon it, thinking about, you know, we were kind of talking about dating, going into relationships, and I think, you know, that sort of tendency when it is new and exciting is to like pour everything into the relationship. I think that's the case for like anyone, but I think especially with ADHD, there can be like a hyper focus on the relationship, which is really fun and beautiful and cute and sweet and all of the things. But also, like you said, making sure that you're also tending to friendships and other relationships and hobbies and other areas of your life. So when that energy kind of naturally wears off, as it will, you're not like left feeling empty. It's like, okay, that was one source of fulfillment for me, and I have so many others that I can like lean on as well.
In your work with ADHD, is there one thing that you wish everybody knew?
I think we kind of covered it. I wish everyone could zoom out more, and I wish that we could really understand the context and the environment and the systems and the norms and all of those things that shape the way that we view ADHD and understand ADHD. If everyone could learn more about neuronormativity, it would be massively, massively helpful. And yeah, just realize that ADHDers are not inherently broken or disordered or wrong or bad. Like, we have so many strengths and so many challenges, and we're allowed to acknowledge those challenges and support those challenges and get support and accommodations, while also like viewing the bigger picture as well. We didn't really talk about sex a lot. I just want to mention one thing really quickly, which is that,
of course,
I think that oftentimes sort of there's like an idea that like all ADHDers are like impulsive and like all really sort of like hypersexual, again, according to what, but like really hypersexual and sort of engaging in, quote, risky sexual behavior and things like that. And while there certainly are plenty of ADHDers that love sex and are really sensory seeking, right, and find sex to be a really amazing sensory experience, there's also a lot of ADHDers who struggle a lot with sex, and I just don't see that represented a lot in the conversation. I think especially for folks who are ADHD and autistic like me, where there's a lot of issues with like being present, staying focused, kind of getting relaxed enough, and then like sensory stuff as well. So I just want to name, like, wherever you fall on that spectrum, it's okay, and you're not alone, and there's not one way this shows up.
It is one of the things I was thinking I wanted to ask you about was sensory sensitivity. Do you have any tips or advice on how folks could navigate that?
If someone is experiencing sensory sensitivities to the level in which they're like really deeply impacting someone and like a huge part of their profile, might want to look at autism. Not necessarily, but I just want to name that because there's a lot of talking about autistic traits under the realm of, under the sort of umbrella of ADHD. But certainly folks with ADHD get overstimulated as well. For ADHDers, it's often a lot more like getting distracted. Like if there's like a clock, or if they're trying to have sex and they can like smell something or see something and hear something, it's like super distracting and like will sort of take away from the experience. So I think just playing around, figuring out your sort of sensory profile a little bit more, figuring out if you tend to be more sensory seeking or more sensory avoidant, and what sensory experiences feel good and bad, and trying to build sexual experience and intimacy around that profile.
Yes, thank you for adding that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to jump into the Patreon extended now, where I have a couple more specific audience questions. But again, where can people find you before we leave the main episode?
Folks can find me mostly on Instagram, Authentically ADHD, or you can head over to my website, authenticallyadhd.com, or you can email me, authenticallyadhd@gmail.com. Those are all good places to say hi.
And another thank you to Love and Pies for partnering with me on this video. The game is so cute and cozy. Download it, give it a try. It's available for iOS and Android. And if you use my link and reach day 3 in the game within a week of downloading, you can get a bonus, 200 energy and 50 gems. So check it out. Thanks again, Love and Pies. Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/AlaynaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at sleepingaroundpod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Alayna Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Corey Mosqueda. See you next time, back here on the couch.